So systems thinking, it's partly about um, utilizing certain methodologies or processes, but I would say it's more about a certain way of thinking or a certain kind of a mindset. And if you're new to it, it's not something that you could just develop overnight. So it does take practice. But I would say from having taught systems thinking and systems innovation over the last, 5, 6 years to a very wide range of different audiences, people find it very, very beneficial. And it's something which can be applied to virtually any field. So when you develop a kind of a systems thinking mindset, I think a lot of things fall into place, and some things which maybe you had previously seen as challenges, they become opportunities. So it can be very, very empowering to think in this way and to use this kind of methodologies and mindsets. When you're thinking about community-based actions, when you're doing something locally, you might find it very difficult to see a bigger picture. So what you do here in Dublin city centre and the Docklands actually has an impact on what's happening in the Arctic. That may be very hard to kind of conceptualize and think about, but everything has an impact. In our daily lives, we go about things, we make decisions, we have actions, everything we do has an impact. And I don't say that to overwhelm you. We know with, oh my God, what are we going to do? We're destroying the planet. We can try and do things the best that we can to minimize our impact and acknowledge that everything we do has an impact and try and reconcile our existence as, on a planetary scale, as a race, as a human race, reconciling that with what's happening on the planet. That's really the best that we can do. Trinity Centre for the Environment, what is it? Well, at Trinity College, there are these research centres. There are various themes. So there's one called the Centre for the Environment, and as you might guess, it's concerned with environmental themes. But environment is super broad, it's like coastal areas, it's marine areas, it's terrestrial land, it's agriculture, it's emissions, it's people, it's different geographies, it's different parts of society. Basically, environment is everything. The Centre for the Environment historically focused on water quality and water quality analysis. I took over as director just over 2 years ago, and I've really tried to broaden the remit about what we do in terms of our research focus and to make it more inclusive so that other people who previously weren't members could feel that they could come in and contribute something. So you might be wondering, what is a system? And a system really, in a very simple sense, you can think of any complexity around you as being part of a system. So I mentioned planetary systems. That's like a really large scale system. But taking things back to a community level, here in Dublin, let's say transport system, or energy system, or water system, or like basically anything you can think of, you could describe as a system. So systems have particular intrinsic components. A system is usually quite complex, and it's made up of smaller bits, which are sometimes called elements. So these are the components within the system. So you could think about, let's say, your front garden. And collectively, it's a garden. The garden could be a system, but individually, you have all these different plants, and the plants have different components. They've got leaves, they've got petals, they change through time, they go through flowering, they go to seed, etc. So systems are always changing. And what's happening in your garden system, let's say, it's very dry in the summer. It hasn't rained in a long time, so things start to die. But what's happening in the atmosphere is a totally different system. It's not part of your garden system. But your garden system needs to rely on what's happening from the rain. So we can see that there's interconnectivity between different systems. They're all interconnected. Everything is interconnected, and everything changes. So systems thinking, it's a way of thinking about complexity around us, that surround us in our everyday lives, and most of the time we're not even aware that they exist. We interact with them, we need things from them, like air, like food, like transport, like energy, like water, but we don't generally think about these systems in a lot of depth, at least not most people. So thinking in systems, yes, it's about kind of a collection of tools and methods, but it's much more than that. It's really about developing a mindset. It's a way of thinking, and that's something that you cultivate over a long period of time. So coming back to the Arctic and sea level rise and tying this in locally, here are two models. Now they are maps, but they're predictions. It's by a group called Climate Central. You can look them up. It's a really neat website. You type in an address in the top left of the website, and it'll give you predictions about what happens with sea level rise. So the right hand is with a 2-degree sea warming, and the left hand is a 4-degree warming. This is the coastline, and where you have this kind of like hatch mark pixelated, this is where the sea is predicted to be. And you can see, even with a 2-degree sea, most of this area is underwater.
Is that 2050 or 2030?
So there's no time
Oh.
print on this. And if you there's a thing, when will this happen? So if you click on this on the website, they say, we don't know. There are huge uncertainties as to the time scale. It could be over hundreds of years, it could be over like millennium, we don't know. We're saying that's the rise in sea level that they predict with a 2-degree warming, on a planetary sense, with a 2-degree average warming. So in terms of exploring this concept about complexities in systems, and particularly unintended or unexpected consequences, what's the connection between what you see in this photo and COVID-19 pandemic? Any guesses?
You mean the
Go.
stranding of the cruise ships?
Yeah, what you see, like what's...
The middle one kind of only looks perfect or habitable, and then
Yeah.
the other two close contacts are ruining everything else.
They are. So what's going on there, do you think?
It's a salvage yard, is it?
It is a salvage yard of a kind, yeah. So what do you think is happening? There is a direct link between this and COVID-19.
They might
Nobody's going cruising anymore.
Yeah.
That's it? Yeah, go on, keep going.
Yeah.
You're on the right lines.
So it's been brought into a salvage yard, it's no longer serviceable, the boat, it's
Yeah,
been
so
taken out of commission?
globally what happened was, you're absolutely right, there was a huge
Land.
downturn in cruises. People didn't want to be in a Petri dish, let alone pay thousands of euros to be in a Petri dish and get sick. So lots of these boats, they all have a lifespan, and ones which were maybe like 10 years of service or something like this, they were shut down, and the longer they're shut down, the more likely it is to have problems when they start back up. So a lot of the international cruise companies said, right, we're going to cut our losses. We might have another 10 years out of these, but chances are there are going to be so many problems, it's going to be so expensive, let's just send them to the salvage yard now. So this is a port in Turkey, and economy was booming there early in the pandemic because so many global tour companies sent their ships there for decommissioning and disassembly and recycling. But like, who could have predicted a virus apparently originating from China could have ended up booming the economy in this city port in Turkey? If somebody had said that to you a few years ago, I think we're cracked. But that's what happened. And this is, part and parcel of the complexities and the unpredictabilities of systems. Sometimes we think we can make predictions, sometimes these predictions are more or less okay, but other times just your wildest guess would not have imagined this connection between them. But there it is, it happened. So this brings me on to the difference between like a linear thinking, traditional thinking, and a systems thinking. Traditional thinking is generally quite a linear process, and maybe if you're a very creative individual, your natural tendency will not be linear thinking. It might be more about systems thinking. So linear or traditional thinking is more A to B. There's a problem, I find a solution. I need to do something, I think about it, I do it. Whereas systems thinking is more complex. It has many components. There might be complex interactions between the different components. Some of them are predictable, some of them are not. If one thing changes, there's a knock-on effect, and there's a cascade effect, and many other things happen. So there's a very fundamental difference between a linear approach and a systems approach, which is nicely encapsulated there. But to try and explain this maybe in a different way, it's something we see a lot of, Dublin city centre, is waste and littering. So there's a problem, and let's think using a linear approach. I have some waste, probably the solution will be you put it in the bin, right? So here's a real photo, a street scene, lots of litter, probably after St. Patrick's Day or something like this in Temple Bar, although probably Temple Bar would be worse than that. Here's a bin in the Phoenix Park, which is full after a nice warm hot day in the summertime and people have been picnicking. There's no more room in the bin. So there's a linear problem solution. You put rubbish in the bin. But what happens when the bin is full? It's like, okay, you empty the bins, you put them in landfill. What if I tell you there are only 2 active landfill sites in Ireland? There used to be a lot more, there are only 2. We're producing way too much waste for these 2 landfills, and they're both on the east coast.
So we export it, is it?
A lot of it is exported, yeah. So linear problem solutions generally leads to lock-on problems. And this is why I'm not a fan of linear thinking. I want to totally steer away from linear thinking. The thing about systems thinking is it forces you or encourages you to take a step back and really look at the whole challenge or the whole problem. They're usually multifaceted. They're usually very complex. They usually involve people, and different people in society will act and think differently. So these kinds of challenges or problems are very, very complex things, and they're difficult to effectively deal with using a very linear approach. So the problem is society generates a lot of waste which people generally don't want, okay? We might think there's a list of solutions. We hide it, like, put it in a hole in the ground, we burn it. Burning can be good sometimes. Repurpose it, sell it, ignore it, revalue it, tax it, criminalize it, or just plain old accept it. So if we explore the kind of systems thinking mindset, we have this list in blue over here on the left-hand side. So this is the kind of stemming from the challenge. These are different possible solutions that stem from the challenge. What we really want to do is truly understand what that challenge is. And I would say there is a natural tendency for most people, there's a problem or a challenge, and straight away you think, I'm going to come up with a solution to that. But to really make an effective solution, you really have to understand the problem. And if you don't stop and take time to think about the challenge or the problem, your solution will not be effective. It might address one small component or facet, but it won't address the whole system. So you might think, for instance, in terms of understanding these challenges, what kind of supports might be needed? So I've listed different supports. Maybe change people's attitudes or perception towards rubbish. Maybe it needs to be tackled from a policy, from a top-down perspective. Maybe there are fundamental changes that need to be made to how things are designed or used, for instance. So in terms of perception, maybe we can see waste as a resource. So can we burn it for energy? Land use perceptions might be, oh, but we can just keep digging holes in the ground and fill them up with rubbish. We've got so much land in Ireland, it doesn't really matter. That's not the case. That's not sustainable use of land. So we have to change that perception. In terms of policy changes, waste management policy, plastic recycling policy, maybe you remember the introduction of the levy for plastic bags not so long ago. This was a huge success and it happened almost overnight. And the disincentive for getting plastic bags when you shop wasn't the cost, but it was more that there was a societal expectation we wouldn't use them anymore, and people could see if you were buying them. So it was kind of like the stigma or shame was like, oh, that person's buying a plastic bag, when actually we're not meant to be doing that. It wasn't really the charge that was the disincentive. Design changes. So I mentioned single-use plastic earlier. Can we design things that we can just use them and reuse them and reuse them and reuse them? Could it be that when my laptop breaks down, it doesn't go to landfill, but bits of it get stripped and reused, and I could upgrade components? Or your phone. There are phone companies doing this. Fairphone is one of them. Packaging design. So bioplastics you mentioned, or biodegradable plastics. Can we design packaging better? Do we need to use packaging for all our fruit and veg? I'd say no. Where it's needed, can we design different types of plastic? So systems thinking really involves asking lots of questions before you come up with a solution to really understand what this challenge or what the problem is. So I'm a big fan of the waste management. I don't know if you've seen these kinds of bins around Dublin City Centre. I think this is a very interesting case study, because the other bin I showed you in Phoenix Park was just, bog standard metal bin, a mesh. These have solar cells at the top, PV cells. They also have batteries inside, by the way. They're not completely self-sufficient for energy. They have compactors, so they compact the rubbish, which means that they don't have to be emptied so often, which means there are fewer emissions from Dublin City Council to go and empty the bins. Some of them are fitted with sensors, so they tell when the bin is filling up. It could be that not all the bins need to be emptied every day, maybe only some of them. What else do they do? They've actually introduced Wi-Fi hotspots in some of these as well.
Air pollution as well, monitor as well.
Air pollution monitor, exactly. So, you know, you're thinking about waste management, you think about a bin, but actually there are all these additional things that they can do. They're in great locations. And this is a really nice example of systems thinking in action in Dublin.